This program is brought to you by Emory University.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much. I am privileged to stand before you today. And just as I said before, it's a session when we just remind ourselves of what has happened in the past, what is happening now, and what we will do to change what happens tomorrow. I have two things that I want to put forward even before even as I start. One, that even as I use the PowerPoint, I know that those who are viewing from out there may not have the advantage of a PowerPoint. Therefore, then what I'll do is, if I am quoting anyone, then I know that you are watching, of course, but I will say the citation for the benefit of those who are watching out there. The second thing, of course, is that I am speaking at a time when the subject of our speech, the subject of this talk, which is Kenya, is going through a very difficult moment. And just as has been said in the past, so do I say today, that religion, well, silence in democracy dies in silence. And therefore then, especially to them that know and understand, we are called upon to speak against evils, social evils. And that's why I want to ask today that even as Kenya, who are resident people, go through a difficult time in their democratic process, may we know that we are together in this fight, and we want to ask that if you know what is right, just as we know that the church is a prophetic message, that message ought to be loud and clear so that truth and justice is defended. Thank you. Today I'm going to talk about Arash's rage. Religious leaders as champions of human rights. That which informed my topic is, of course, a video from the 1990s. A video of a reverend being beaten like a dog in front of Parliament because he dared challenge the forces that be. This is one Reverend Timothy Njoya. I will give you his story as we continue. And he was tired. He had come to a point where he said, we must not keep silence, and we must speak truth to power. And for that, they beat him up and left him for dead. In fact, the report that went to the hospital was that there's no need to take this man to emergency because he was dead, so he should be taken to the mortuary. But the doctor who was in charge and who was a member of his congregation insisted that, please bring him to me. I want to confirm that he's dead before he's taken to the mortuary. And that's how come he was resuscitated, and he lives today to tell the story. I have the following outline that I would want us to follow. I'll give us a brief introduction that gives us a chance to marry what we did in the first lecture and now. And then I want to highlight a few reality checks, and then point us to a number of things, a number of occurrences that changed the story, the Kenyan story, especially the killing of Tom Mboya, who was a minister in the independent Kenyatta administration, and then an oathing crisis that brought a lot of trouble to those who believed, the Christians. And then, of course, then I will make loud the noises of those who have made a mark by their decision to stand and speak truth to power. I will talk about Alexander Muge, I'll talk about Henry Okulu, I'll talk about David Gitari, and finally I will finish with Timothy Njoya. And of course, I know that there are so many others who are doing that which we say today, but the unfortunate thing might be that there is not someone to chronicle this, or they do not come to the national limelight. These also we will talk about, and we have in thought even as we discuss. Now, I want to remind us by just start this by giving us two quotes. One from Henry Okulu, and the second one is from the Church of England's evangelical missionary evangelical group. when Owen, W.E. Owen, the archdeacon of the one they call the archdevil of Kavirondo, made a complaint asking that the church should speak for the downtrodden. This is what that meeting told him. The church does not, as a rule, become the mouthpiece of the discontented. In fact, the church does not let them speak even in her voice. That's why we honestly think that it is a true charity to encourage the African to become an ardent politician. Let them rot in their not knowing. There's no, this is the plight of the African. There's no need. And that is what happened, even at independence. This fact that many believe that there is no need for the church to speak for the downtrodden. Because they have to do a balancing act. Membership of the church is both the very poor and the very elite. And when you speak against power, of course, you're speaking about against the elites. And therefore, then, of course, you also know that the elites are the ones that bring in the tithe. Well, everyone brings the tithe, but those who bring in the tithe to move things are the elites. I will tell you of the first African, the Attorney General of Kenya, who was a very, very committed member of the Anglican Church, and how his influence, how his membership to the church influenced how things were and how the church approached politics. And then Kenyans were first liberated through a liberation movement from the colonial powers. But that was not the end of it all. And now there is a need for a second liberation, and that is a liberation from the black colonialist. And that was by Henry Okulu. Even as he said, God sent his son, a sermon that he gave in 1992, even as he was condemning politically instigated tribal clashes that the Emory government organized to discourage a political pluralism. Now, I want to tell us that when in 1963 Kenya got independence, the person who was charged with taking over the mantle from the British was a man by the name Jomo Kenyatta. He was a man who had lived in Britain for 16 years. And therefore his understanding of the church and state relations was that as crafted in England. The church was supposed to be there, yes, but it was as a partner. It is a partner. It ought to have worked with the state. And therefore then he was not prepared to imagine a church that would stand against him and against his policies. And he came up with a policy. And then, of course, that together with African socialism, the African understanding of what leadership is, many times, yes, a leader can be opposed, but it can only happen in a council. Once a decision has been made in the council and it's to be communicated to the populace, then they have a duty. They have a duty, and that duty is that we must speak in one voice. That was it as we are coming into independence. That's what Kenyatta expected of everyone. And then he came up with a motto, and the motto was Harambe. Harambe, well, some say that it is Hail Ambe. Hail Ambe. But then, yes, we borrowed it from the Indians. And it says there's a need for a pulling together. Whenever it is that we can't afford to be divided in this time of need, in this time of nation building. Let us pull together. And therefore then there's no need for what? There's no need for an opposition. So what they first did, as soon as we got self-governance in 1967, independent in 1967, self-governance in 1964, what they did was to dismantle the opposition. The opposition was dissolved, and then we formed one huge thing called the Kenya National African Union. So every politician had to be part of this story. And then the other thing that we need us to understand is that the church was part of the colonial government. For example, the Archbishop of the Anglican Church of Kenya from 1950, I think, 3 to 1968, from 1953 to 1969, was a man by the name Leonard Bisha. And Leonard Bisha was the representative of the native interest in the Legislative Council. He sat in the Legislative Council from 1930s all the way to 1963, when there was independence. And therefore, that was it. We envisaged a church that would be part and parcel of government and work with it. And then, of course, certain things that I need us to flag as well is that ethnicity has played a big role in the positions that churches have taken, and in their interaction with government, in their interaction with the state. Many times you will realize that the leadership of the National Council of Churches of Kenya, NCCK, either spoke or kept quiet depending on who was its leader. For example, if a Kikuyu was the leader and Kenyatta who was a Kikuyu, was the president, you will realize that many times they were quiet. Okay. The other thing that played a role as well is the faith of who was the president, who was the leader. For example, while the Catholics were known for a quiet, they are not very controversial in their approach to power. There were times when they came out and spoke against Emory, the second president of the republic. However, as soon as the third president was a Catholic, the third and the fourth were Catholics, they are Catholics, they kept very quiet as well. So then that is the balance that I want us to, and the background that I want us to have even as we go into the next part. And then the final thing that I want to make us realize is that the church as an institution never took a stand against the government. As an institution, it never did. In fact, the persons we have highlighted are people who made a decision to stand. They made a decision to stand, and this was taken against the very risk of their own life, the very risk of their liberty, and the very risk of their position in church. I will tell you that in a number of instances, some of them were defrocked because they were making too much noise against the government. And then the final thing then, let me then take us to certain reality checks. That was the background. This is what ought and needed to happen. But then let's tell us, welcome. Let me tell us now some reality checks. Okay, first, Kenyatta very fast realized that Kenya was not England. And therefore then the prominence that the Anglican Church played in England could not be replicated in the Kenyan situation. That became very clear. There were a plurality of views. There were the Catholics were taken. Less 30% of the Kenyan population was Catholic. Another 30, let's say 25% was Anglican, and then the rest were these evangelical and other small and African traditional churches. So then that England could not be replicated in Kenya. The government had to work, but knowing that we could not have an established church, establishment was out of question. The other thing that woke up people, and they realized that freedom was not what was promised. Uhuru, everyone fought for Uhuru. Uhuru is independence. And they thought that this was this wonderful, beautiful thing that once you got, would ensure that all your troubles were gone. All the poverty that the Africans had known, all the discrimination in the workplaces that they had known, the carrying of a kipande. Kipande was an identity card that you had to hang around your neck as you walked around and showing where you're from, and you have been allowed to walk from this part of Kenya to the next part of Kenya. And if you had it, you didn't have it, then you would be a vagrant. And there were laws on vagrancy, and you could find yourself in. So everyone had this beautiful view of what freedom would be. they realized that in fact, that reminded me of a movie from South Africa, a movie done in 2007, or maybe 2010, 13 years after independence, 2007, 13 years after independence and then they were looking at what their vision. It begins at a point where people are this excited, they are singing in the streets, hoping that there is this independence, and we have it now. Everything's going to change, and 13 years down the line, the hopelessness and how systems failed and how people continued to live in the ghettos. Jerusalem is the title of the that's the same thing. That's the reality check. That's the title of the movie, Jerusalem. Beautifully done about some young boy who was raised as a Christian, and he goes out into Johannesburg to look for a job, and he realizes that life is so difficult that he becomes a thug, and then after that he tries to become a Robin Hood, trying to steal from the rich to help the poor, but then the law eventually caught up with him. That's the same reality check that the Kenyans came to. There was a lack of vision, and then there was a systematic marginalization of other ethnic groups. That is when they broke the promises of the fruits of many people. When they were fighting for independence, they fought because they knew that their ancestral lands would be restored to them. Unfortunately, as soon as these guys came into power, what they did was to divide. They decided fast that historical claims to land meant nothing. They took the land that were taken from the natives, and what they did is, you are coming as seller, willing buyer, willing seller. So the government took a loan from the British, and then they bought off these settler farms. The white-owned farms were bought from the white men as they went back to different places or relocated or went to South Africa and Rhodesia and other parts of the world. And once they did that, then the loans, Kenyatta and his clique and a few friends and other people also had this access to capital, appropriated all this land to themselves. Then what the next thing they did was to come up with settlement schemes in places that were either too remote or too dry or not habitable. And therefore then ancestral claims to land were totally disregarded. Those are some of the reality checks that made the Kenyan church think that there might be a reason to speak up against the what? Against the government. And then now things came to head, and the end of the honeymoon between the government and the church came to in 1969. There was a powerful minister, a nationalist, unionist, trade unionist leader who was very young but very talented, but also very ruthless as well. He was used by the government, by Kenyatta, to do a lot of many things, and as a result, he became very feared. But when they, Kenyatta was an old man. They estimated when he was born. They are not so sure when he was born, but it must have been the 1800s. So by 1960s, 68, 69, he's an old man. He keeps getting sick, and he's hardly seen in public. And therefore, then the succession politics takes place. People want to think. They want to place themselves to succeed him. And the only one who stands between them and that is Tom Mboya. And what they do is, one of these days, someone just steps out and shoots him in the broad daylight, and then just goes. Well, he was caught, and he was tried, and he was executed. And this is a report from when on the day of his execution. You are killing me, but what about the big man? That was his question. You are killing me, but what about the big man? No one has known who the big man was. But yes, when Tom Mboya was killed, there was massive, massive demonstration. Ethnic tensions became worse. Tom Mboya was Luo, and Kenyatta was Kikuyu. Then they were the two biggest ethnic groups in Kenya. And when he was killed, the Luos felt frustrated, the Luos felt betrayed. And that is when people started speaking, and that's when the church, especially the Anglican Church, came out. Part of the Anglican Church came out and said, this is not right. We must speak against. This. And that is when Kenyatta felt threatened, what he did was to come up with a program, an oathing program, where we want people to swear allegiance to the house of Mumbi, just like Christians have Eve, the Kikuyus have Mumbi, who dropped from heaven and formed the. So then they had to swear an allegiance to the house of Mumbi, and that brings me to and introduces me to the East African Revival Movement. Yeah, I started in 1927 in Rwanda. I came to Uganda in 1930s, early 1930s. This was a movement that insisted on salvation, not just salvation, but a salvation experience that made God, Christ, your personal Savior. It was not enough to be baptized. After baptism, were you baptized by fire? And anytime anytime I talk about the revival movement, the song Tukutendereza Yesu Comes Back. That is what it was eventually called, because they were characteristic of this song called Tukutendereza Yesu, Yesu wana gwendiga. Well, so these are people who believed. They believed that as a Christian, you could not take oaths. And Kenyatta insisted that you must take oath. And that's when there were some certain martyrs. And eventually, the leadership of the Anglican Church, Bishop Obadiah Kariuki, who was in fact, Kenyatta's brother-in-law. He was Kenyatta's brother-in-law, had to come out and say, we refuse to take these oaths. Yes, we swear allegiance first to God, then to the president, but we will not take these oaths. That was the end of the honeymoon and the beginning of a struggle, and that takes me to the names that I highlighted earlier. And I will now look at a meddlesome priest, a man called Bishop Henry Okulu, who became a Christian when he was at home, and his cousin became a Christian, and his cousin came to home and he was reading Revelation 9 aloud. And Revelation 9 is that should be the the angels with trumpets, and the trumpets of what happened, of a lot of trouble that is about to befall the earth. And he didn't want to be part of that trouble. So he said, I want to be part of these people who are proclaiming the salvation of the Lord. So he decided to become a Christian, and he went to the mission church that was next to his place, the place where he was born, Ramba in the Kavirondo. And then he was very good. He ended up going to Kima school. At Kima school, the food was not too good. And they went on strike, and he was declared to be the ringleader, and he was made to remove. I understand that because of some of the punishments that even I went through. You were made to remove. He was made to remove a stamp of a big tree, remove a stamp, and then he was made to remove it, and after that he had to apologize. And after he said, he knew he was not the one who had conducted this strike, and he decided that I'm going to leave school. So he stayed for the semester, but after that, he went back home and he said, I will never sit back and see injustice again. And he wrote and told them, I am not coming back to school, so please send me my certificate. And when they sent him a certificate, he said he was average, yet he said, since I came to that school, no one beat me in that class. So then how could I have been just average? And then he tore that certificate and he went about his life without the certificate. Ended up at working for the military and as a clerk in the military, and eventually found his way to Uganda and worked as a clerk at the East African Railways. And when we talk about Uganda, that was the epicenter of the Tukutendereza movement. And he met William Nagenda, Simeon Nsibambi, the very pioneers of the movement, and he became saved. And he wanted to be what? He wanted to be a priest. The movement didn't want any of their members to be part of the clergy because they had been expelled from the church. Well, eventually he convinced them, and he went to the ministry, and he became a priest ordained, and then he went to be a chaplain at a sugar factory. At a sugar factory, and for complaining against the atrocities committed against the Africans, he almost lost his job. But they organized so that he was brought into to Virginia Theological Seminary to do his Bachelor of Divinity. And I think I want to highlight this, that is when he now realized that, well, while out there was a bit of the Africans were not treated right. When he came to Virginia, that's when he realized that there was a big bar between the colors. And so one day he says that he was hungry after shopping in Alexandria, and then he entered a restaurant and sat down to eat lunch. Fortunately or unfortunately, it was a white only restaurant. So the waiter comes and tells him, sir, we do not serve blacks here. And this is what he says: I don't want blacks, I want chicken. I don't want blacks, I want chicken. He doesn't tell us what eventually happened, but he realized that there was a bar to how far he could go because of his color. He went back, and he then went to Liverpool. He was trained as a journalist. And then he went back to Uganda in 1960, just before independence. And he was a writer in Uganda. A writer for this, he wrote in Uganda. And that is when, as a journalist, he realized he had to speak. There was no difference between being whatever. There were 4 things he was told: speak the truth. And number 2, speak it plainly. And number 3, don't fear to speak the truth. So he went out speaking the truth, and that brought him problems. Eventually, he had to leave. Eventually, he had to leave. He had to leave and return. He returned to Kenya in 1967, when the Baganda thought he was a collaborator with Obote, and he comes back to Kenya, and he's given the task of leading a weekly newspaper called Target, and Lengo. Lengo was the Tanzanian version, Target was the Kenyan version. And that is when he started speaking against the establishment. That's why in 1967, when KANU wanted to build a huge monument, a huge headquarters that had not been the highest, they wanted the highest building in Africa as the headquarters of KANU, he spoke against it. And then he said, God is not a God of souls only, but a God as well, but of the body as well. A true Christian is one who is truly in the world without being of the world, truly holy and truly worldly. We cannot imagine ourselves as standing here and speaking the wonderful, this wonderful, great story without coming out and speaking and telling the truth as it is. And this brought him a lot of trouble with the powers that be, but he was saved. In fact, for that piece, he was the assistant editor. The editor was fired, and he got a chance to be to lead, be the priest of the Holy All Saints Cathedral, the headquarters of the who and who in the Anglican Church in Nairobi. And then many times he spoke against land grabbing, ethnic profiling, marginalization, detention without trial, and authoritarianism. And that ensured that he earned not just friends, but enemies as well. And when they could not entertain him any further in Nairobi, they made him the bishop of Maseno South. That should be far away from the city, so we can deal with you from down there. And then there when he went, and by the way, he went there as 1974, I think 74 when he went there. And at 1974, the Luos were marginalized. Since 1969, when Tom Mboya was killed, every member of the Luo was somehow thrown outside, was dismissed from the civil service and from political appointments, and he went and spoke for that group. He is one of the first, in fact, he is the first person he ordained the first woman priest in Kenya, and that was in 1983, 10 years before the Church of the Province of Kenya made a decision for that ordination, because he thought women could do more. They could do as well as these people. They were allowed into the seminaries. They did so well, and then after that they were being told, you cannot be a priest because you're a woman. You cannot be ordained. So he was one of the first people to ordain, and in fact, he was the first. I want to say that Henry Okulu died in 1999, but he retired from the bishopric in 1994. After 20 years as a bishop, he was respected. In fact, at one moment there was even a suggestion to have him appointed as the Vice President of the Republic of Kenya. And that made the politicians very mad, because he was not from a family that was known, and he was not anyone. The second person that I want us to highlight is a man by the name David Gitari. He was known as a man of the Bible because he was always reading the Bible, even as he was in high school. He formed the first African Christian Union in the Christian unions he formed the first one, and even the Christian Union, the University of Nairobi, was formed by him. And then he eventually became the Archbishop of Kenya. But before that, at one moment, as soon as he went and was trained in UK, and he got his Bachelor of Divinity from the University of London. But as soon as he came back, the powers that be said he was not qualified to speak in the Anglican Church. And that's how come he ended up at the Bible Society of Kenya as a General Secretary. And as a General Secretary, he was ordained as a deacon. And he went in 1972, I think, 1972, preached his first sermon in St. Mark's Church, one of the Nairobi churches. And do you know what happened? One day, a day after his sermon, he received a letter from the Archbishop telling him that he was not allowed to preach anywhere in an Anglican pulpit throughout. What happened, and that brought him back to the Anglican Church, was the death of some man called James Madenge, JM Kariuki, who was an MP of Nyandarua, an MP who was a firebrand, an MP who found his way to opulence through hard work and identified with the poor. And he spoke very openly against the Kenyatta government. And as a result of his speech against the Kenyatta government, he was killed in 1975. He was killed in 1975. And since he was beloved of the people, there was the whole nation felt they needed a lift. And that's why the NCCK approached him and told him, we have organized with the Voice of Kenya. That was the only radio station then. Go out there and preach. I have 5 minutes or less. I have 5 minutes, then I'll open it up. They went and told him, go out there and preach. And therefore he had this five-minute segment between 5 minutes before the prime time news in the morning. And it was titled, Lift Up Our Hearts, Your Hearts. Lift Up Your Hearts. At the end of the 5th day, he was summoned to the Ministry of Interior, and he was asked, bring the transcripts of your sermons. This is what he said: "It is the church's heavy responsibility to remind the nation called to be holy of the standard of righteousness and justice, which alone can exalt a nation. If, however, those in authority depart from the righteousness which God expects of the nation, the church should follow the footsteps of the prophets and the apostles in declaring boldly the righteousness and the judgments of God. The church must speak." And then he told the people who were interviewing, he said, every life is sacred. Your life is sacred. Your life is sacred. Your life is sacred. And therefore, no one has a right to what? To take it. In fact, they have a right to do what? To preserve it, and not to exploit or to eliminate it. After that, they left him. But then they made a decision that he has to get out of Nairobi. So they went, they went and formed a new diocese for him, the Diocese of Mount Kenya East. And then, without him knowing, a council was elected. A 10-man council was asked to look for a bishop, and they decided to give him the bishopric. So he was ordained a bishop and taken away from the state. But he never kept quiet, from the nation, and he never kept quiet. He was always a thorn in the flesh, and that's why I think there's a book, Meddlesome. When he retired, they did a book in his honor. They just understand, explaining what it is that how he went from where he was and how he came to what he was and what he believed in. Finally, I know there's so much, but I want to go to the last man. There's so much. I think I'll provide somehow a copy of this for anyone else who would want to speak to. Finally, I want to talk to you. These are people, the first two people that I've spoken about are long dead. But the one man who is alive, and he's alive, and I have a copy of his dissertation. Dynamics of Change in African Christianity, African Theology, by Timothy Murere Njoya. Timothy Murere Njoya was a Kenyan Presbyterian minister. He is a minister. He was trained at St. Paul's United Theological College in Limuru, but he disagreed with everything that the missionaries taught him, because he said that was dogmatic and systematic, and he never identified with the local people. He had problems in church, and therefore he was sent he came to Princeton University to study, and he did his master's there, and then he came up with this wonderful book that talks about a revolution, the gospel as a revolutionary power. Gospel as a revolutionary. While everyone else spoke, the other people spoke from their pulpits. this man, Timothy Njoya, that did not just speak from the pulpit, he spoke from the streets. In fact, today I called him. When I went home, I wanted a session with him, but I couldn't because his life is, as a human rights activist, has been made so hard that getting to him is hard because you never know who it is who is coming. So when I went to look for him, someone told me, just leave your number, he will call you. And unfortunately, he called me after I came back to the US. And we talked. And this is what, when I told him what it is, the project I was working on, this is what he told me. Okay, I'm working on this, the contributions that the church has had in furthering human rights in Kenya. And he told me, which church? He asked me, which church? And I said, clergy. What clergy? Tell me. Then he asked me, and that is true. Tell me which clergy went out of their way, except of course the daily noise about social evils that every Christian can talk about. Tell me which clergy was revolutionary enough to come to the streets. And I didn't have an answer. And today, you can easily find the books by David Gitari. You can easily find the books by Henry Okulu. But the only book that, and I found them here at the Pitts Library. But the only book that I have of him is his PhD thesis. But he's written many other books as well. For example, he says, With the People. One of the books that he's written is With the People. Thinking heavenly, but acting Kenyanly. He says, yes. Sorry, God, the challenges of time. I have the one person that I will say has inspired my thought of what it means to be Christian, and what it means to stand for truth, and what it means to be out there and walk the talk, is Timothy Njoya. I want to encourage you to read. Last year, or maybe 2 years ago, there's a documentary, Case Files, Timothy, the untold stories of Timothy Njoya. It's on YouTube. You will be moved by the atrocities committed against him, and the many things that he has said, that he's forgiven them. And maybe probably, I think I will stop here by highlighting. There's a 3-minute video of his story. I hope we have time for that, yes? 3 minutes. I can stop it at any time as long as I know you have the gist of what is happening. I pray that I stop here. I should have warned you that it was gruesome. I apologize if... but then finally, let me just say this, and I don't know what time I've left for questions, but I want to say that... where was... Okay. What more shall I say? For time would fail me to tell of the following. Alexander Kipsam Muge, the Bishop of Eldoret, who was killed for condemning the atrocities of Moi government. Mutava Musimi of NCCK and the Fungamano-led initiatives for political reforms that laid the path for a new constitution in Kenya. What about Father Anthony John Kaiser, the American Catholic priest, gunned down on the 8th, on August 2000 for fighting for the Maasai land rights and condemning injustices in Kenya. I have no time to talk about Archbishop Ndingi Mwananzeki of the Catholic faith, and his contribution to the liberation struggle. And yes, many other church leaders who continue to fight for the common man away from the cameras and the chronicles of the high and the mighty. In fact, there are many local church pastors who engage local chiefs and local administrators to fight for the rights of the oppressed. People like Pastor Joshua Okanja, a friend of mine whose work with the youth the widows and the orphans has left a lasting impact on what it means to have a church for prophetic ministry. We salute them, and I do ask, that let the prophetic ministry of the church continue. Thank you. Okay. Questions? I don't know how I will. We have maybe 11 minutes, but let's see what we can do with those times, with that moment. So here we are. Atieno, Prof, welcome.
Thank you. I just had a question about, definitely what's coming out of your presentation is sort of the human rights mission of the Christian Church in Kenya.
Yeah.
And we know that there are many other human rights actors in Kenya
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
So my question is, what is it that the church feels it may be getting by having its human rights platform rest on Christianity? Okay, it's a platform that's based on this Christian identity, and what are the advantages of having that Christian platform for
Okay.
this human rights advocacy,
Okay.
and possible disadvantages as well?
So,
I think that's really my main question. Is it?
Yeah,
Let me leave
yeah.
it open and see what
Yeah.
you think. I mean, I have my own
Of course.
ideas, but of course I haven't studied this.
Okay, no problem. Can I take another? Then I answer. Please.
Okay. I guess my question is more about the futuristic aspect of the role of church in human rights. As Africans, we know how Africans are very into religion and how it can play a positive and a negative role. We have churches in Kenya that, make their congregants eat snake. And you read that. You also know about the one that will tell them no underwears in church. They should come. They have very powerful effect on their followers.
Mm.
And personally, I think the church should be trying to move away from being, he should talk to his congregants, but the role of the church is so powerful, and any religion anyway in Africa is very powerful, that it can go a very long way in terms of asking them to go out and talk against oppression. It can also get, you see how we have the House of Abba group in Kenya, and then in Nigeria, the Boko Haram, and how it can go to the extreme. So in future, and the role of church, what are you going to say about limiting its role, or is it going to be open, or do you want the state to be involved in the state should be involved in how the church should be governed?
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll start with those two. Of Christianity and why Christianity and human rights? Because it is the business of Christianity is the business of the church leader. They want to be relevant. They want to help change the face of Kenya. They must. Let me just start by saying that there's always a message there's always a Christian message, or maybe there's always a religious message to capture a moment. Okay, when the missionaries came, it was the kingdom of heaven. It was this kingdom message, and therefore, then as soon as they were succeeded in after the Bible, the next thing that they translated was the Pilgrim's Progress, and how his troubles will be, but there's this glory of the coming kingdom. But after independence, that had to change. We now had that which we have the kingdom, but has it reflected in our lives? That also had to change. Why? There are other players that have done great things as on human rights in Kenya. The answer is yes. Do they have a place? Every bit. Have they worked with the church before? In certain instances, they have. For example, in the run-up to the Sabasaba, the church and the politicians worked very closely, as he was trying to explain. Charles Rubia and even Manasseh Kuria and others, what they did to us to ensure that we had a change of the constitution to have multi-party democracy. The reason why it's relevant is because church in Kenya is, as you speak, is very influential, and they have a say, and yes, that say ought to reflect and change the world, ought to reflect and be reflected in the society as well. Others have done great things. Sometimes they have worked well, sometimes they have failed to work together. In fact, there are instances, and when I talk about church, I'm talking about individuals. We started by saying that that the church has never, many times they've never taken a position for. Many times. Okay, there are few instances when there's an evil, of course, that everyone can speak against, and they speak against it. But when they are forced to stand against the government, institutions are they're not very willing to do that. Now, the church, the church and the power that it has, and sometimes the church is very powerful in Africa, that's true. And that power is always either exploited, very many times exploited. So then, am I asking for a greater role for the church in the fight for social evils? I want to say that I am asking that the church speak out when there is evil. Should they speak more? And how can we balance? How can we avoid the fundamentalism that might actually result from this? Many times the good thing that we have is that many times the established churches they have always found ways of reconciling let me just take you back to something on David Gitari. There are four possible ways. Gitari, where are we? There are four possible ways that the church can engage the state. One, they can enthusiastically support it. They can passively ignore, or they can engage in a constructive dialogue, or they may outrightly oppose the state. What he has suggested is that the church should have a critical distance that ensures that it can objectively speak truth to power, and that's what I'm asking for. And yes, there are times when the church has exploited its power and its influence, but it's not the norm. They are exceptions. Thank you. We can take another. Doug is nice. And who else? Okay, let's start with that.
Just a very good presentation. Just have a question. I mean, do you see the institutional church as really ever playing a role of really extending itself and criticizing the establishment? Or can it only really be a few dissenting voices, maybe people who embody that sort of prophetic voice, men like sort of, or women, but men like Najoya,
yes,
and sort of some of the other personalities to which
yes,
you've alluded? I mean, do you ever see the church as really an institution,
okay,
as ever really confronting the government and challenging it where it acts,
okay,
you know, out of line with human rights demands?
Okay. There are instances when the church has come out and done that, but many times they wait too late. For example, the experience of Christianity in China, when many times the church did not align with the communists until it was too late. And when the communists came, you know what happened. They went out to punish the church for what it is. I think, yes, it is always a balance of who is who. For example, many times people the church will want to look and then see, are our interests served? Who best serves our interest? And many times that's what they do. If their interests are served, they will stand with whoever it is that serves their interests. And many times it may be against the popular move, or even the popular demand of the populace. Very many, because they want to see, they want to ensure that they stay relevant, and yes, I think that's what happens. Professor Whitty.
Thank you very much for your presentation and opening this world to us. Is there such a thing as a Kenyan theory of human rights? And is there a Kenyan Christian theory of human rights? I mean, that's a bit of what these questions are about. Is there something that the Kenyan churches, Kenyan theologians, the Kenyan mind has contributed to human rights discourse that's distinctive, if not unique?
Okay.
And what is that? Or is human rights just a free-floating cipher that provides a vehicle for opposing various kinds of economic or political or even internal church conduct that is considered to be a violation of the person or the community?
Okay. Thank you. Is there a Kenyan theory of human rights? Well, certain theologians have pronounced themselves on what it means to be human, what it means to be, for example, David Gitari has extensively written on the place of the human in the church ministry, and not just that, the church as a community, and then rights as they relate to who holds them, who can claim them, and who are the promoters, who can promote it as well. Henry Okulu did many books. One of the books that he said was the Church and State in East Africa. And in the Church and State book in East Africa, he goes through. He looks at the place of the, for example, the debate that we have on the church as the theory of the two kingdoms theory, and then he says that well, we may theoretically have two kingdoms, but these two kingdoms interlocked. These kingdoms they reflect in different. There's no clear cut whatever. You cannot cut and say this is the end of the Christian kingdom. This is the beginning of the temporal kingdom as well. So then, yes, they have addressed themselves to this. The other thing also that someone might ask is, why is it that I have only talked about the established church mostly? What about the indigenous, African indigenous religions? What about the African inland churches, for example? The one thing that stands with the African inland church is, England churches is, I think it is a philosophy of survival. And this philosophy of survival would be avoid as long as possible, avoid contradicting, coming into conflict with the established churches. That's what happens. And many times, not just that. And myself, I'm an Adventist. And many times the Adventists will be quiet about, they will not be seen anywhere near any possible controversies, because, of course, the trump card is Romans chapter 13, verse 1 to 2. Every kingdom on earth is ordained by God, and therefore every Christian has a duty to but that and then I think that changes with the established churches, for example. Sometimes there's too much to lose in silence. They are forced to talk. So yes, there is a theory. I may not be able in this short time to tell you what the theory is, but yes, I will highlight that as well when we engage further. Okay. Thank you.